In December, I preached part one from Psalm 37. And what we did then was address the question, where are you headed? What is your ultimate destination? Today, we're going to look at the subject of the Christian life. And it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind of a sermon. We're going to cover a lot of ground, drawing on the whole parts of the whole psalm. So hang on. God will help you take hold of what he wants you to take hold of. We're going to look at the Christian life under four headings. Persecution is real. God is our refuge. The world is our stage, and prayer is our posture. So, persecution is real. Psalm 37 presents us with two kinds of people. Throughout the psalm, there's the righteous and the wicked. The righteous are those who know they are sinners deserving of God's judgment. They turn to God for salvation through Jesus Christ. They seek to live according to God's way for God's glory. The wicked, on the other hand, suppress the truth about God, as in Romans 1, verse 18, and by extension, about themselves. They refuse to acknowledge their sin and need for a Savior. They reject Christ as King and seek to be the Lord of their own lives. The righteous and the wicked are defined, first of all, not by their acts, whether it be kindness or violence, but by their relationship to God. Do they defy their Maker and refuse his kindness, the offer of forgiveness and everlasting life through faith in Jesus Christ? Or do they welcome and worship their Maker and receive his kindness? The way that God calls the righteous to live and that Christ exemplified in his life is to love your enemy. It's to go the extra mile and show kindness to those who would oppress you. Jesus said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." But the wicked reject this way of life. Paul tells us in Romans 9, verse 7, that the mind that is set on the flesh, and this is the wicked, is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. They are hostile to God and his Son, Jesus Christ, which leads to hostility and even hatred of those who love and follow Jesus. Psalm 37, verse 12 reads that the wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him. And this gnashing the teeth is a fanatical hatred towards the righteous. Verse 14, the wicked draw the sword and bend their bows to bring down the poor and needy, to slay those whose way is upright. And in verse 32, the wicked watches for the righteous and seeks to put him to death. Well, this is not our experience. It has not been my experience. I have never been threatened with my life for believing in Jesus. But for many Christians in the world, this is their experience. For some, just to say they are a Christian is to sign their death sentence. The freedoms that we have here in this country, although we are beginning to lose some, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom to pursue education, to choose our occupation, to move where we want to live, the freedom to teach and raise our children in what we believe to be true, are fundamentally because of the influence of Christianity and the Bible's teaching over centuries that all people, men, women, children, and unborn babies, are made in the image of God. Therefore, all have dignity and worth that deserves honor and protection, regardless of color of skin, or ability, or station in life. This is a gift from the Christian faith to our culture, a gift that gives the foundation for the freedoms that we value so highly in the West. But for many of our brothers and sisters in Christ, they live in countries and regions that do not have a heritage of the Christian faith tempering their culture and the laws, so that the wicked have much greater latitude to threaten and act violently against those who profess to follow Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 11, "Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account." And Hebrews 11 speaks of those who suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy. Persecution is real. In China, children under 18 are banned from going to church. Communist Party members, civil servants, law enforcement, doctors, and nurses are prohibited from attending church. Chinese Christian children are being forced to renounce their faith publicly in front of students and teachers. In North Korea, Christians are quietly at night hauled away from their homes to concentration camps or to be executed. In Ukraine, under the Russian occupation, Ukrainian Christians are being pressured to deny their Christian identity and must now meet in secret for their safety. Christians face severe persecution in India, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Iran, and many other places. Our persecuted brethren need our prayers and support. Acts 12, verse 5, which we read last week, when Peter was imprisoned, the church was in earnest prayer for him. And Hebrews 13, verse 3 reads, "Remember those who are in prison," that's Christians, "who are in prison as though in prison with them." But persecution also touches our lives. It may be a matter of ethics at work, where you are pressured to lie to cover up a mistake. Students may make fun of you because you won't participate in questionable activities. Your job may be on the line, like some Christian doctors in Canada. Canada is on the forefront of legalizing euthanasia, making it available to more and more people. Next month, Canada will reach 100,000 people who have been poisoned to death. They no longer see human beings as made in the image of God. Doctors who refuse to refer patients for euthanasia face losing their license. And this is what's coming to the UK. This may sound like a gloomy, depressing portrayal of the Christian life. Take heart and listen. This is the game changer. God is our refuge. Psalm 37 begins in verse 1, "Fret not yourself because of evildoers," and concludes in verse 40, The Lord helps them and delivers them. He delivers them from the wicked and saves them because they take refuge in him. The Christian knows that the work of Satan, the forces of evil, and the power and strength of the wicked are far too powerful for us to contend with and overcome. In fact, we cannot master the evil in our own hearts. Left to our own devices, we are doomed before we even begin the fight. But the Christian also knows that next to God, the power of evil shrinks to nothing, less than a drop in the ocean. Our God created the universe. He orchestrates all things for his good purposes. What he promises, he delivers. Numbers 23 verse 19 reads, God is not man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? In verses 12 and 13, we read that when the wicked plots against the righteous, the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he sees that his day is coming, a day of reckoning and judgment. And so in verse 20, the wicked will perish. But as for the righteous, in verse 23, the Lord establishes the steps of the man who delights in his way. Verse 24, the Lord upholds him when he falls, when he's knocked down by the wicked. 28, the Lord does not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever. God, as our refuge, gives us the grace we need to sustain us through every trial and hardship. Jesus says in John 16, verse 33, in the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. What does it look like to take refuge in the Lord when you are subjected to persecution? Richard Wurmbrand was the founder of Voice of the Martyrs. He was a Romanian Jew and an atheist who was converted to Christianity and became a Lutheran minister before World War II. Then the Nazis overran Romania and persecution of the Jews and Christians began. He and his wife were arrested and beaten many times. This was but a foretaste of the persecution they would experience when the Russians came at the end of World War II. In his book, Tortured for Christ, Wurmbrand describes in some detail the 14 years of imprisonment that he experienced and the kinds of torture that he and other Christians were subjected to, and which I won't describe here. Read the book if you want to know more. It's not a long book. But what comes through in this time of imprisonment is a profound gratitude to God. That God had set them free through Jesus Christ. And they were filled with a love for their captors and prayed for them. This is the Lord upholding them with his hand. They had a contract with their prison guards. They would preach the gospel to the other prisoners, and the guards would beat them. As they took refuge in the Lord, he gave them grace to endure. He strengthened their faith. He increased their love for their enemies. He gave them perspective to see that their persecutors could be transformed by the grace of God, even as Paul was transformed on the road to Damascus. Some were finally set free from prison, but many died there. Persecution and prison is not something we seek, but for many Christians, it is their reality for following Jesus. But whether in prison or free, God is our refuge. He gives us the grace we need for every situation. For those of us who are not imprisoned for our faith, which is all of us here, God has given us a freedom to live out our lives in this world in a way that is not constrained by the bars of prison. God gave our first parents, Adam and Eve, 3 great mandates, and these mandates still hold today, and the world is our stage to live them out to the glory of God. And this is our third point. The world is our stage. When David wrote this psalm, the Israelites were dwelling in the land God promised to Abraham. Yet, he makes it clear that God's people had not yet inherited the land God promised. In verses 10 and 11, it says that in just a little while, the wicked will be no more, but the meek shall inherit the land. And in verse 29, the righteous shall inherit the land and dwell upon it forever. Paul sheds light on this in Romans chapter 4, verse 13. For the promise to God and his offspring that he would be heir of the world did not come through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. What God promised to Abraham in the Old Testament is in fact a promise to all God's people throughout the ages and includes the entire world. But we have not yet received our inheritance. And although we are waiting, nevertheless, God says to his people wherever we are in Psalm 37 verse 4, dwell in the land. To dwell in the land is to live out the creation mandates that God gave our first parents. The social mandate, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, marry, have children, grow as families and live in community together, build homes, build cities, and flourish as human beings made in the image of God. And the cultural mandate, subdue the earth and have dominion over all its creatures. This is not a tyrannical rule. It is acting under the lordship of the Creator to care for and steward the earth, to grow an understanding of how God's creation functions, and to harvest its resources in a manner that is wholesome and good. It is being creative under the great Creator, our Lord Jesus Christ, expressed in the arts, in sport, in sciences, and technology. And finally, the fellowship mandate is to walk in fellowship with God, living in obedience to his commands, which are always good and for our flourishing. We are all at different stages of life with different interests and abilities in different situations, and this will shape what it looks like to carry out the mandates that God has given us. It may be planting a garden, enjoying and sharing its produce to the glory of God, or singing in a choir, roasting coffee beans, taking photos, calculating derivatives, playing in the orchestra to the glory of God. It's working in our profession, raising our family, and pursuing our interests, all for the glory of God and for the blessing of the community around us. Many consider Johann Sebastian Bach the greatest composer that has ever lived. His understanding of how musical notes relate to each other and his ability to take that understanding and create the most beautiful music is stupefying. Do you know what Bach wrote at the end of every single piece of music he composed? The letters SDG, which stands for Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone be the glory. Bach's music was not just for his and his family's enjoyment. It was for the larger community, and his music has been enjoyed by people around the world, both Christians and non-Christians alike, and it was composed all for the glory of God. We may not be a Bach, but this is no competition. It is a life of worship before God, and it may simply be resting in our chair or lying on our bed because of ill health and old age, expressing our thanks to God for all his goodness and praying for our brothers and sisters and remembering those in prison. How we live out these mandates is on display before the world. And Psalm 37 provides us a list of the things that should characterize how we live out these mandates as we dwell in the land and engage in the world around us. In verse 3, it says, "Do good. Put away wickedness. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you." Jesus says in Luke 6, verse 27, "Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God." That's Micah 6, verse 8. And then in verse 3, "Befriend faithfulness. Demonstrate steadfastness, fidelity, and trust. Be a person of your word, someone who is dependable and trustworthy. Be principled and act with integrity." In verse 21 and verse 26, "Act generously. The righteous is generous and gives. Resist the temptation to measure your wealth by your bank account." Verse 16 reads, "Better is the little that the righteous has than the abundance of many wicked." Bruce Waltke, a Hebrew scholar, wrote a commentary on Proverbs, and he comments that the righteous are those who are people who disadvantage themselves for the sake of the community. They see their resources for the purpose of benefiting others. And then finally, in verse 30, "Speak wisely. The mouth of the righteous utters wisdom, and his tongue speaks justice. The law of his God is in his heart. His steps do not slip." Your way of life, how you act towards others, your character, your disposition to give generously and sacrificially, and the words you speak, do they match your actions? Are they considerate and kind? Do they speak the truth and share the good news of Jesus Christ? Your way of life is what is on display before a watching world as you pursue the wonderful mandates God has given us on the stage, which is this world. So, to rehearse our main points so far, persecution is real. God is our refuge. The world is our stage. And finally, prayer is our posture. Psalm 37, verse 7 reads, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him." To be still before the Lord is to quiet yourself before him in a posture of prayer. It's to see yourself rightly in relation to the Lord. And David says in Psalm 40, "I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me." It's to thirst for God as the deer pants for living water in Psalm 42. It's to speak with God and lay out your complaints and questions, Psalm 42, verse 9 and 10. It's to listen and attune your ears to God's speech in his word. Often, our hearts and minds are in turmoil because of trials, suffering, and temptation we experience. To be still is to bring all this noise and the murmur of our hearts to the Lord, to be honest and open with God. It's to thirst for God and allow Him to speak into our storm, to be quieted by the whisper of His Spirit, bringing words of hope and life through His Word. And it's turning our thoughts to Him, to His purposes and His promises, wrestling with God in prayer to see His kingdom manifest in this world, and buoying up our hearts with hope and expectation, waiting patiently for Him. Jesus Christ was crucified for our sin. He rose victorious over death. He ascended into heaven, where He rules and reigns over all that is, working out His purposes for His glory and for the good of all those who have placed their trust in Him. And He is coming back to judge all mankind and to fulfill His promises to all who wait on Him, ushering in the new heaven and the new earth. Friends, in the Christian life, persecution is real. Suffering for Christ is normal. But God is our refuge. He will give us everything we need to sustain us and bring us through. And the world is our stage, where we can pursue the mandates He has given us and display before the watching world the character of Christ through our actions, our steadfast and faithful character, our generosity, and our speech. And prayer is our posture, because all this is far too much for us, but not for our God. And so, on bended knee, with His Word open to us, we still our hearts before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. This is the Christian life. Yes, it's challenging and can be hard, but it's good, it's wonderful, and it's satisfying. And it's the only life where you will walk in fellowship with God. And you know how it ends. Psalm 37 tells us, wickedness will be no more, and we will dwell in abundant peace, living in fellowship with God and with one another forever. If you have never seriously considered the Christian life, but find yourself wondering if you are missing out on the best thing ever, a life with Christ, then I would invite you to speak with Adam or myself or others in this church family. There truly is nothing better, and that's what we want for you.